So now let's talk about reading the data and specifically some vocabulary that goes with how data is organized. So first let's talk about variables. So the variables are the characteristics being recorded or measured. So if we have all variables, this can split into two branches. There are numerical variables and categorical variables. So numerical, as you can imagine, that's when we see numbers coming through. Another word that comes up with numerical variables is quantitative. Quantitative. And as you can imagine, our class is going to focus on numerical variables quite a bit because we can do so much with numbers, specifically math. So we're going to be looking at numerical variables a lot in the following weeks, but there is a second type of variable, and that's categorical. And this is where you will see words or images showing up. So as we talked about in the last video, like it could be a picture of something, or it could be in words, like we talked about weather, so the word sunny, versus numerical, where maybe it's a temperature reading. But the idea with categorical is that these words or images creates a category to fall into. Another word for categorical is qualitative. So you may see those two words show up, quantitative versus qualitative. It's the same thing as saying numerical versus categorical. So let's look at our numerical variables. So numerical variables branch into two pieces. There's continuous numerical variables or discrete numerical variables. Numerical variables that are continuous, we say are measured. So like height or weight, things that are actually measured out there. So let's say, for example, I collected weights. And let's say I had someone that's 138 pounds. But if I had a scale with some more accuracy, maybe I could get a decimal place. We could get super accurate and have even more decimals. The idea being that if I had a number line and I was plotting these points, and I had, say I marked these whole numbers on a number line, really we could land anywhere on this number line. With something that's measured, we can get certain decimal places of accuracy, and with that, that can open up the whole number line as possible places to land. So continuous measurements are numerical, and it's just the specific type where, because it's measured, we can see any value come through. Discrete numerical variables are counted. So say I was collecting the number of students in my courses. I could have a class with 32 students, I could have a class with 28 students, but I'm not going to see any decimals there. This is something that's counted as whole values. So with this, if I made a number line and we had these spots, we can only land on very specific spots on this number line. So without seeing those decimal values, this would be considered discrete. So numerical variables split into those two branches. Let's now look at categorical variables. So we're going to have nominal, which is unordered categorical, and ordinal, which is ordered categorical. Nominal, you might also see described as just regular categorical. It's just kind of our standard categorical, and then there's ordinal. So regular categorical, or nominal, is described as words or images. So this is where you could see yes, no. You could see words like cloudy, sunny. If we were collecting weather, like I talked about before, it could be pictures, so like a cloud or a sun. Those would all be considered regular categorical, words or images. Ordinal is when there's an order to it. So like if we were rating something. So say you were rating it with stars, 1 star to 4 stars. that star rating would be ordinal, categorical, because 1 would represent something bad, 4 would represent something good. You can see numbers come through here if you're rating something 1 to 5. If there was some association like 1 is terrible, 5 is great, that would actually be categorical. Even though you're seeing numbers come through, technically it's creating categories, like 1 is the equivalent of terrible. It's not actually a numerical measurement or something counted. It's just a rating system. Another way this comes through is anything that's like first, second, third. Again, it looks like numbers, but it's technically categorical because it's just creating these categories where it happens to use numbers, but really it's portraying something in words. All right, so those are some branches off of numerical and categorical. However, in our class, what we're really going to focus on is just telling the difference between numerical versus categorical. So it's good to be aware of those kind of smaller branches, but your main worry is just going to be denoting numerical versus categorical. So that deals with variables. Let's talk about cases. So when you look at data, you'll be able to describe the cases. And the cases are the respondents, participants, subjects, or experimental units. So when we're asked about the cases of data, I often think about like who participated or what participated. Who or what participated in this data? So who did we collect this data from? That's going to describe the cases. This most often comes through as the rows of the data. So when you read across a row, that typically ties together with a single case within the data. Then variables, what we just described up above, are those characteristics or measurements. This is the idea of what was recorded. Like, what information did you write down as the researcher? And this often comes through as the columns of the data. So let's take these ideas of cases, variables, and the types of variables to this data set down here. So there's this data set. In one column, we see these ID numbers 1 through 5. In the second column, credits. This is like the number of credits they're taking as a student. We see 15, 12, and 5. In that third column, it's an award that they would like to win someday. So we have an Olympic gold medal, Academy Award, Nobel Peace Prize, things like that. We have number of siblings that they have, the number of hours of TV they watch in, let's say, a week. They're rating their school 1 to 5, and then their pulse. So what are the cases of the data? So if I wanted to answer, what are the cases of the data? So these are survey results from, and actually that says 10 statistics students, but we only have data for 5. So what are the cases of the data? What I'm really asking is who participated in this study. So if I look at the rows of the data, we can see we have these 5 students and all of their information. So the cases of this data are the 5 statistics students. If I then go to answer what are the variables of the data, then what I would look at are the columns. So if I look at the columns, I have ID, credits, award, siblings, TV, school rating, and pulse. Each of those titles I can take as a variable of the data. Now, ID is kind of a toss-up. Different resources describe it differently. It's not really a variable because it's not a characteristic of the person. Like just numbering people 1 through 5 is probably the researcher just assigning someone. If it was a student ID number, then that would be a variable because that is a characteristic of the person. So ID is kind of a toss-up of when and if it's considered A variable, if it is included, it's considered categorical. So I'm going to go ahead and include it here, but just so you know, that can sometimes switch around. So what are the variables? We have ID, credits, award, siblings, TV, school rating, and pulse. Okay, so that's how we see cases and variables. Cases go across the row, and it's really about who participated. Variables are the columns typically, and usually with that you can just grab the title of that column. So describe each variable as categorical or numerical. So if ID is included as a variable, it would be considered categorical because it isn't anything that's measured or counted, really. It's just an identifier. Number of credits, so that's something that's counted, so that is numerical. Award, that's giving us values in words, so that would be categorical. Number of siblings, that's something that's counted, so that would be numerical. Number of hours of TV watched, that looks like that was counted as well. That could technically be measured if you used a stopwatch or something, but that would be numerical. Rating the school 1 to 5. So this is that case where it's an ordinal. It's creating an order with the numbers, but really it's not anything that's counted or measured. It's more associating good versus bad. So really each of these numbers would have to correlate with something that's in words. So this is actually categorical, and pretty much all rating systems will be categorical. Pulse is something that is counted. You're counting the number of beats per minute, and that would be numerical. So just to summarize with this, when you're determining numerical versus categorical, you're looking at the values that are being represented in the columns. If you see anything that's words or images, that's going to be categorical. When you see numbers, it's typically numerical, but just be careful of these specific cases where they can actually switch into categorical realm because they are ordinal.